So welcome, good morning to San Francisco, 8:30 in the morning. I'm from Chicago. I work for Red Hat and I'm part of the JBoss division. So I'm one of the early developers of the JBoss application server. You're familiar with JBoss, right? You might have used it. So I'm like the lead security architect for JBoss. So JBoss platforms and JBoss suite of projects and products. So I'm kind of the main security person for that. So let's go to the agenda. I've had a show of hands from you here, and it seems like not many of you have actually used the cloud environment, right, as much. But you encountered things like, oh, we need SAML, we need this identity management, we need this, that, right? And you have these questions every day. So, this presentation kind of gives you, a lot of information about what's involved with identity management, security, identity, and things like that. And hopefully, you should have a few takeaways from this presentation, which will enable you to make better decisions when somebody asks you to do something. So I'm going to talk about cloud identity and tell you what's the concept of identity and trust. And then I'm going to kind of very briefly tell you about a platform as a service, what's a Java EE enabled PaaS, and we have a platform as a service for developers from Red Hat called OpenShift. So I'm going to tell you about that. And this is one of the classic problems that plagues our industry. Which identity management standard to use, This whole bunch of them, and people like me have trouble getting our heads. But the issue is at the crux, all of these standards are solving one problem and doing it one way. It's just, I personally feel like the security industry is kind of, just inventing new things, the old reinventing the wheel, and starting new things when you got to fix the old things and things like that. So I'll talk about some guidelines that we security practitioners use called levels of assurance, and then I'll just talk about best practices, which are just not for cloud, but this is applicable in your applications, in your enterprises, and some of the challenges you might have, and some of the best practices, and things to watch out for. Whole bunch of them. So hopefully, if the demo gods have woken up by 8:30 in the morning, I'll have a couple of demos to get you a feel for what's involved, and I'll finally close with some of the standards that you should be taking a look at, or just put it on your plate to just monitor. Finally, I leave with resources. So let's start with the concept of identity and trust. Yeah, I'll put it on SlideShare also. I mean, we are an open source company. Everything's open. So, oh, I should have put a legal, the big disclaimers now. Yeah, we're part of JBoss community, in open source. Concept of identity and trust. What's an identity and trust? How many of you are familiar with Twitter, right? Have you seen this check mark, this blue check mark? It's been there for 3 years now. So that's the concept of Twitter verified accounts. So when I created this image, it was in beta, but I don't know if they have made it they come out of beta. But this is Twitter's program to kind of assert that a particular account belongs to a particular person, right? So as examples, this is the official Twitter account of President Barack Obama. I don't think he has actually tweeted anything, As far as I know, probably once or twice he might have done, but this is his official, even if he has his subordinates do it, but this is like official information coming from the president's account. And how do we know that? We know it through this blue check mark, verified account, right? There's a Twitter account for the Queen of England with no check mark, and I follow it. It's pretty funny. And we had from Chicago for the mayor. I forget what it was, like a spoof, and it was very funny. There's going to be a book and stuff. So we have a lot of Twitter accounts which provide entertainment, but they don't really belong to the people they are kind of representing. So this is Twitter's program for verified accounts. So when you look at this, the identity is President Obama, but what's the trust? Twitter's providing the trust with the blue check sign. So that's a very simple differentiation, So when you have your driver's license, the name on the driver's license is your identity, but who is providing the trust that this is valid? It's the Department of Motor Vehicles or any kind of government ID. So there's a very subtle difference between identity and trust, and sometimes people mix and match, and so you just got to know that. So another example of Twitter verified account, Tim O'Reilly, who is a pretty popular in the publishing and in the open source world. This is his account. So let's talk about cloud environments. So many of you said like you haven't actually experienced cloud environments, and some of you believe. But I mean, it kind of started as a FUD, not FUD, FUD, whatever you want to call. But it's kind of moved past it, and people were primarily saying it's just like a hosting environment. It's no different from a hosting environment. It's definitely, but there are a lot of types of cloud environments, and the economics of scale and the benefits that a cloud environment might bring to you, outweighs all the concerns, basically. So Red Hat as a platform as a service environment, and when I say platform as a service, it's a cloud environment to run your applications. You don't have to worry about starting, stopping, or starting like a Java application server, or worry about if the database has been started and things like that. So it's an integrated platform for you to run your applications. So OpenShift by Red Hat, and I want to point to the last statement. It's free, so use it for running your blocks or test applications, things like that. So it's a polyglot platform as a service. It allows you to run multiple languages, applications. People run their WordPress blogs in OpenShift, Ruby, Perl, Python, PHP, Node.js. But one thing that's interesting is we provide full support for Java EE 6 in the cloud environment. So you have JBoss application server, a full instance running in the cloud. So you can write any of your Java EE 6 applications. And also we have, I think you can use the JBoss platform, which is more like a stable version of JBoss also. And it's free. So basically OpenShift has two concepts, a concept of gears and a cartridge. Gears is basically a concept of resource allocation. So how many, how much memory is allocated to you, and how much file space is allocated, and things like that. It's more like a resource constraint concept. It's called gears. And cartridges is like if you have a Java cartridge that's like a JBoss cartridge, then you have a PHP cartridge, Perl cartridge. So it kind of, when you say create an application with this cartridge, it opens up all the things for you, like hooks for you to deploy applications, to start JBoss, and if you're using PHP or Perl, the appropriate environments is set up for you. So that's the concept of cartridge. So let me show you. So it's available at OpenShift.com, which kind of redirects to OpenShift.redhat.com, and you can read its free auto-scaling platform as a service for applications, basically. So how many of you run like blocks or something in the open, like if you have hosted or something? So I mean, you can use it, OpenShift to run your blocks and stuff. So kind of for free. Of course, there are some resource constraints that you have to kind of meet, and each person is allocated like 3 gears. So basically, you can have 3 application spaces. Within an application space, you can have multiple web applications and stuff. So you still have like gear constraints, more like a resource constraints in the cloud environment because it's a shared environment, right? So classic question, which identity management standard is relevant and what's your choice? Which would you choose? What's your favorite? SAML? Okay, how do if somebody says, oh, can you evaluate if we need SAML, if we need OAuth, if we need OpenID, if we need WS Trust, Kerberos, this and that, how do you make that choice, right? Where do you start? And what we use is something called NIST 863 special publication, which has this concept of levels of assurance. So it defines 4 levels of assurance, and the first level is wherein you have little or no confidence about the asserted identity. If somebody comes and says this is Anil, it can be Anil, it may not be Anil. You just say, okay, Anil, come in and do whatever you want to do. But what you can do is, depends on the asserted identity. So there's very little confidence in who this person is. So the technologies that fall under this level 1 of level of assurance are OpenID and OAuth. And where is this environment coming in from? It comes from your blogs and your forums, right? You don't really care who it is, as long as they come with some identity. But you won't do any kind of banking or any kind of enterprise type operations with level 1 identity, basically. So level 2 gives you a little more confidence than level 1. There is some confidence in the asserted identity. And password-based mechanisms like a username password fall under level 2. And if you use SAML assertions using password authentication mechanism, it also falls under level 2. So this is like you can say like a gold standard for choosing identity management standards. And you will see security practitioners use this term like level of assurance a whole lot. Level 3, as we go higher up, level 3 provides very high confidence. If an identity has come in as saying Anil, we know that yes, it is Anil, right? We have used multiple mechanisms to kind of assert yes, this is Anil. As an example, I had to go to a government agency in Chicago with my Illinois driver's license. Was it driver's license? Yeah, with my driver's license. And the government agency said, no, I need your passport. They wouldn't trust an Illinois driver's license because, there's been a lot of forgery, things like that. So they wouldn't, but they would trust a passport. So again, you have to make a choice as to which, artifact you are willing to choose, and what's the arm that if you choose the wrong thing, what happens? So, all of these fall under these levels of assurance. So if you're using like crypto tokens, one-time passwords, usually you fall under level 3. Level 4 is when you actually are in the military or, the 3-letter security agencies. This is like extremely, you need to have extreme high confidence on the identity. So like, if you're in like like a military or all these classified environments, you have multiple levels of clearance, right, to do things. So that's where you're operating at level 4. So they use some type of like certificates and some kind of smart cards, hardware modules and things like that. They need extreme high assertion on the identity. So I've told you about all these 4 levels. Now, now how do you choose a standard, right? You have to differentiate between a community type environment and a enterprise type environment. So when you talk about a community type environment, you're talking about forums, blogs, so you just need level 1 assurance. The key here is it's at internet scale. Now, if you want to kind of assert the identities for anybody in the world, I mean, we have like 7 billion people. Potentially like 7 billion people can come to your website, right? For a community type setup, I mean, it's an overkill to actually ensure all their information is in your database or in your data store. And if you want to do password management, all this fun stuff that comes with security, if you want to do that for an internet scale setup, it's going to be it's going to be an overkill. And the technologies that operate at this internet scale is OpenID and OAuth. And they also have something called a decentralized setup. There's no central authority for identities, right? So if you're going to use OAuth and use your Facebook or Twitter, now your application may support Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. There's no single authority for identity. It's a decentralized setup. The user comes with his own identity. But the key here is internet scale. It's like large number of people. And it's very applicable in forums and blogs, basically. Somebody wants to leave a comment, level 1 of assurance, you might use OpenID OAuth type environment. This may be relevant to some of you is when you work in an enterprise setup. Now you need at least level 2 assurance level. So one good standard to use is SAML, right? SAML assertions using password-based authentication. And if you need level 3 or level 4, you just use SAML with PKI or certificates, X509 certificates. And you can use like smart cards and hardware-based modules. But this is where you use operate in an enterprise type environment. So these guidelines kind of apply to a cloud environment too, right? So it's nothing different from when you're operating in a non-cloud environment and a cloud environment. You still have to make all these choices. When you're dealing with within an enterprise, if you have things like Active Directory or any of these directory servers, and they all expose like Kerberos, right? So typically in your enterprise, you might be using like Kerberos-based authentication, Kerberos. So that Kerberos kind of works within a single domain. WS Trust, it's pretty useful within an enterprise wherein you have like web services, or if you have EJB applications, web applications, various types of heterogeneous applications, then you can use WS Trust. And the key concept in WS Trust is something called an STS, Security Token Server, which issues tokens. And the standard token that an STS issues is a SAML assertion. So SAML's kind of, in my opinion, is the king of enterprise identity management. And on the community side, I think like OAuth, it's the upcoming standard that's probably going to be popular, and OpenID Connect on top of it. Okay, best practices, the fun stuff, right? So user registration. Do you agree that all security systems need users? Right? You need users. So users can come from your corporate identity store, or you need to dynamically register them. If you have a community type environment, and if you allow like external authentication, you might want to register them. And if you want to expose like a sign up service to your application, then you need to dynamically register. And how do you distinguish between a bot and a human being? There's something called CAPTCHA, which doesn't, when you provide like a sign up or a login sheet, you have to populate the CAPTCHA field, without which you're not going to make the request to the server. So that kind of, it's a very simple technology to kind of keep away bots. And there are a lot of password strength meters, indicators available in like JavaScript libraries for your applications. So just using those JavaScript libraries, you can provide those meters, like indicators, like passwords weak, strong, things like that. A key concept in cloud paradigms is the concept of cloud directory, right? If you have a public cloud wherein you have applications that are shared among multiple the public cloud shared among multiple applications, and we have the concept of tenants. So you have multiple tenants sharing resources, your memory, your server space, and things like that. And cloud, if you're in the public cloud, where does the directory of users stay? Is it going to stay in the cloud? You're going to keep all your user information in the cloud? What if your cloud environment gets hacked and stuff like that? What happens? Or do you keep the directory inside your enterprise, right? So you have to make a distinction. This is a classic problem we have in the industry right now, what we call like identity provisioning. How do you provision users, whether you keep a subset of the user information in the cloud and keep your master store inside the enterprise. You have to make those decisions. That's one of the classic problems we have in the cloud. How many of you know the story of LinkedIn passwords getting hacked? I mean, they did take some security measures. It wasn't that they kept things in the clear text. The last recent one was IEEE, something like, I don't know, a few 100,000 passwords were in clear text or something. It got exposed from IEEE. So in case of IEEE, they had kept the passwords in clear text. But LinkedIn had not kept the passwords in clear text. They had hashed it. But the thing is, if you just hash it, it's susceptible to dictionary or brute force attacks. And that's where they, a lot of the passwords got exposed because they just hashed it. So when you look at hashing, it's a one-way process. You take a password, hash it, and you get something called, what's the term? You get a hash value. But the issue is, if you have one password and a particular hash algorithm, you're going to get the same hash, right? So you can use something called like a dictionary of hashes and see, okay, that's the password, things like that. Or you can use a brute force attacks wherein you can mix and match the letters and keep trying. So the key concept is you need to salt it. And what happens is salt brings a randomness to the hashing mechanism. So you can append to the password or prepend to the password and then hash it. Then it provides an additional level of security, basically. And the salt should be unique per user. So, again, the concept, you have to figure out, where do you store the salt and things like that. Salt can still be in the user table, for example. So the key concept is just don't hash, you need to salt and hash each password. Password reset is a big pain, right? People forget their passwords, and how many passwords exist per user, right? So it's you basically can issue single-use tokens which have like 15-minute validity and things like that, and you can send it to an email. So identity management, right? The classic problem of directories. So if you have directories of users, where does it stay? Is it going to be in the cloud, or is it going to be a corporate based? And there's some use cases where, or systems where you may have a hybrid directory. So you have a cloud-based directory and you have a corporate directory, right? And you need to figure out how to sync between them, and the classic problem of legal and compliance, right? So you may have legal issues based on your vertical. If you're dealing with some kind of healthcare information or financial information, then probably your information shouldn't be in the cloud, public cloud, that one. But when you say cloud, somehow public clouds, come into mind. But you should also know there's a concept of private clouds, right? Private clouds is still within the realm of an enterprise, but they're using virtualization, basically. So private cloud is really useful for enterprises. I mean, it's no different from your hosting environments in your enterprise, but some of the legal compliance issues go away with private clouds. Okay, here's an architecture that you may use for directories. So as you can see, your user store, your databases, directories of users may sit inside your corporate boundaries, and you may have a team managing it, and it may be clustered, all the failover, fun stuff, it's all available. And you have corporate apps that your users, like your enterprise users, your customers, and your internal employees may be using. And you may have partner applications that your partners use. Like when I say partner of your enterprise may be using. They all will have your classic corporate access. They're coming directly to your, to your website and accessing them. But if you have a public cloud environment, right, and if you're exposing some kind of cloud services, it doesn't necessarily have to be your cloud services. You may be using Salesforce, you may be using Google Docs, you might be using what other, like WebEx, all these cloud services that need some kind of authentication, roles, and all this fun security stuff. So this architecture then comes into play, basically. So that's when you have cloud access. So one setup that you may use is you have an interface between your corporate boundary and a public cloud using a mutually authenticated SSL, a private link between the public cloud and your corporate infrastructure, and you might use a REST-based interface. And you basically have now facades inside your public cloud. So even though your authentication, you're still going back to enterprise through that link to get the user information, and your stores may be sitting in the enterprise. And this can happen when you have a program to register users, partners for a long time, and now you don't want to try a new thing, because if you have invested a lot in your directories in the enterprise with teams and investment, you don't want to just throw it away, right? So this kind of works. The biggest problem that exists right now in using cloud-based services is how do you expose your directories to cloud services? How many of you use Salesforce? Some of you use, right? And you need a mechanism for your employees to use Salesforce and use your corporate portal somehow, right? So some of these challenges come there. Okay. Can you get away from username password? How many of you want to get away from username password? Right? What's the problem? The alternatives, are all promising, but require some kind of setup, right? If you go to put a retina scan, or you go to a fingerprint reader or whatever, now you're vacationing in Hawaii, some island, and suddenly you need to access your corporate systems. Okay, look for your retina scanner, you want to look for your fingerprint reader, password works because it's something you know. It's very simple, That's the beauty of passwords. We just cannot get away from passwords, and that's the problem. And so you have to kind of bring in an additional factor of authentication, either through some kind of password questions, what we call knowledge-based authentication, something and the questions bring in the additional factor of authentication. So if you can't get away from passwords, you have to bring in this additional factor. You can also use something called one-time passwords. If you use Gmail, most of the Gmail users have got hacked, right? So Google has come with this concept of two-factor authentication, right? So you can use your mobile device, and they have an application on it, and each time you go to your Gmail, if the computer is not trusted, you will have to enter the code, right? Then you can say trust the code, and hopefully you will not get hacked. Trust me, most of my friends have got hacked, Gmail. And same goes to Yahoo or any of your free services you're using. And if you have a Kerberos based setup, you can use Kerberos for your API and stuff. This is my personal favorite, external authentication. If you're a small or medium business with no proper IT capabilities, you don't want to deal with password management headaches. How many times you forget your password? Trust me, every year, at least once a year, you have to reset your password or call someone, right? So you have password management headaches. Why bother? If you have level 1 type of application, you need higher level of assurance, right? You're running a community, a blog or something. Why don't you just externalize that authentication to Facebook, Twitter, and Google? You don't need their password, right? I don't care about your password. All I care is Facebook says, yes, this is Anil. Okay, I'm going to accept Facebook's statement that this is Anil, or Google statement or Twitter statement, and just let's move on, So if you have a simple like a e-commerce site, you're trying to sell some bags or some t-shirts, then there's going to be a credit card, right? Somebody's going to use a credit card. There's some level of security for you, if it's a bad credit card, then the credit card company takes, liability for that. So you have to make all these choices based on your levels of assurance, and password management is a huge headache for systems. Authorization, you have to figure out if you need like coarse-grained authorization. Coarse-grained authorization typically uses like role-based authorization, like, okay, this is an employee, this is a salesperson, and when you say like, okay, what's this resource, like in the terms of Java EE, it's always coarse-grained. It's always for a web URL or a EJB method against a role, but you can't make fine-grained authorization checks for things like a junior trader cannot make trades for above $1 million, things like that. So no context-based authorization support in Java EE, basically. So XACML is a standard from Oasis, and most of the Java EE providers have support for XACML through their security settings. We provide it through JBoss application server too. And you have the classic ACL list, it's proprietary lists. You just code up, your system admin would have coded up some ACL lists to provide fine-grained authorization. And a new style that's emerging in an internet scale level 1 type environment is OAuth. Mobile devices. How many of you expose your applications to mobile devices? Right? The challenge is there's no clear identity for a mobile device. Right? There's a SIM ID, you change it, you put a new SIM, basically the phone as a new user, right? So there, iPhone, you have like UDID, that's the unique identifier. And from what I've learned is the chips have their own ID. So you have to figure out which one you're going to use for your registration. So something to remember when you're dealing with registering mobile devices. If you're using mobile devices, typically use some form of tokens, and the standard that's emerging is OAuth 2. Identity providers, identity providers kind of are the central source for identities. Rather than your authentication be embedded inside your application, it makes sense to use an external authentication source to an identity provider will do the authentication of the user and sends back some kind of SAML assertion, for example. So in a cloud-based environment, you have multiple choices. I mean, you can have a central identity provider for the entire platform as a service. So in the case of OpenShift, we might provide, let's say, a central identity provider for all the tenants. Google does it with like Google App Engine, and Amazon as this Amazon IAM capabilities. Basically, Amazon is acting as the central identity provider, and Google says you just check this something in your deployment, and boom, you are able to now take in like all the Google users, Gmail users and stuff. So basically, in this case, the platform as a service is providing an identity system for you. So central identity provider, a global directory service for all tenants, all applications. But as a tenant, you have the flexibility to deploy your own identity provider for your application. So if you have about 5 applications that you are putting in the cloud, you can deploy a single identity provider for your 5 applications. So this is like tenant-based identity providers. So now when you're dealing with services like Salesforce or Google Apps, they also provide something called corporate delegation. So now you're using your corporate portals, but you see that you are able to go to Salesforce seamlessly, sign on to Salesforce, or you access your Google Apps account. What happens is Salesforce and Google provide abilities for your corporation to authenticate with your own corporate servers. So you have to expose authentication services which go back to your enterprise directory and then send back, and then you authenticate and send back the user information to Salesforce or Google. And how does the trust factor come in? You'll need to sign in the assertions with your certificate, and that's how Google trusts you, because there is a back channel or out of band trust establishment between your enterprise and Salesforce and Google. So this is something that you're going to see a lot. So when you're talking of SAML, I mean, you have multiple applications, and your identity provider has access to an identity store, and so whenever a user tries to log into a service provider application, you redirect to an identity provider, and where you do the authentication, and your user information is available there, and then the identity provider sends the user back to the service provider. And in this case, the identity provider is going to kind of assert, yes, this is Anil, and I use password-based authentication. So it will be in a SAML assertion. And now level 1, level 2, level 3, right? Those 4 levels of assurance. So if the identity provider has used certificate-based authentication, it can state in the SAML assertion that I used X509 authentication mechanism, then it immediately goes into level 3. Okay, how many of you use Twitter? Mobile Facebook apps, right? So it's all happening through an API. I read or heard like more than 60% of Salesforce access happens through an API, not through their website. More than 60%, right? So now you have an additional avenue for your users to interact with your system, and that happens through an API. So if you have used any of these third-party applications like your Facebook application in your phone, your Twitter, LinkedIn and stuff, so what happens is now it's all happening through an API, And now you need to kind of bring in a token-based system. So there needs to be a token attached for each invocation happening to the cloud. And OAuth 2 is a good candidate right now because it's a standard. Even though there's been a lot of negativity around it in the last few months, I personally feel it's going to be the standard. The reason is Salesforce supports it, Microsoft supports it, Google supports it, Facebook supports it, Twitter supports it. All the major corporations of the world, WebEx supports it. Everybody has adopted some flavor of OAuth. So even though there has been a lot of negativity, it's not going to go. And we don't have alternatives right now. So various drafts and flavors of OAuth 2 is in operation right now. And the beauty of OAuth or a token-based system is the user has full control over the approval and revocation of access. And this I notice a lot is when a mobile app requests permissions to your Facebook account or your Twitter account. Why do they need full access to your wall postings and your friends information, right? All they're trying to do is assert who you are. That's it. So if you have to figure out as a user, so what happens is, the liability is being transferred from the application to user. So when you're talking about cloud services, it's a question of liabilities, right? Something bad happens, who can you blame? So there's always people trying to push the liabilities out of them to somebody else. That's the play. But if you notice that you have provided like full access to your Twitter account or something to a particular application, you can go and revoke it. And that application doesn't have access to your password for that service. All it has is a token that you approved that it interact with the Twitter or LinkedIn, right? Something to make note. Before, like Twitter allowed OAuth access, it would like something like your New York Times app or USA Today app on your mobile device would ask for your username, password to your Twitter account, so that you could share a news story on your Twitter feed. So now you're giving your username, password to New York Times app, right? But now what happens is, after Twitter said no more username passwords for third-party apps, now they give you this app wherein you log into Twitter and then you get this form, this console which says like a New York Times is requesting access to your Twitter account. Would you approve, yes or no? If you say yes, then New York Times gets a token from Twitter on your behalf to make posts. So, but now you're not given your password to New York Times. I think last year New York Times, it's complicated. New York Times was actually serving malware through their ads. It's the beautiful world we live in. Even though you're getting a content from SSL, HTTPS, you have a secure content. There's no requirement that the sources on the page have to come from a SSL-based environment. So if you're using some ad environment, that ads may be serving, some kind of malware and some viruses and things like that. So, people, like established companies, like reputable companies like New York Times have been affected. Not to scare you, but there's a lot involved in all of this, and the challenge for users to make the decisions, it's tough. How do you, if there's an application which just needs to take in your username, password to find who you are, why does it need access to your birth date, to your friends' wall postings, their pictures? So you have to make the decision. Now Facebook, Twitter have pushed the liability on you, right? Things you need to understand. So OAuth interactions, what happens is, first the application has to register with the server to get a client ID and secret. And this is like if you have let's say, a photo sharing app on your mobile device, and now the photo sharing app registers with Facebook and it gets its own client ID and secret. Previously it was called consumer key and consumer secret. Now the resource owner, that's me, authorizes this application for it to access, let's say, my Facebook account. And it can provide various scopes like email, like your name, address, birth date. So it can ask for various scopes and you have to authorize it. And the application gets an authorization code which has its own expiry and things like that, and which it saves it on on your mobile device. And now whenever it needs to post something on your behalf to Facebook, Twitter or something, it's going to use the authorization code to get an access token and a refresh token. A refresh token helps the application to get new access tokens on expiry. It's a bit involved, but this is the handshake and dance that happens when you deal with a mobile app, for example, dealing with Facebook and Twitter. And then the application provides token to, let's say, Facebook, then you get access to the resource. So I just have like a simple demo to show, but before that I can answer any of your questions like for a few minutes. Do you have any questions?
So are there any good frameworks for JE applications if you're building your own API and you want to support OAuth for your clients? Do you have any recommendations?
I mean, I have a project called PicketLink. So we do provide like a CDI based security API and an OAuth project. I don't use it in this demo, but it's available for you if you want to use I think I am actually showing it in a tab. Like it has a simple API.
And that would create the tokens in and out.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get token from an OAuth server, you can use the client API. But if you want this, yeah, we have it as part of a project. PicketLink. Yeah. Okay, let's. Looks good? Okay. So I have a Java EE, like a Java EE6 application with all the latest buzzwords like HTML5, things like that. As part of this project we have called AeroGear at JPaus. So I tried to access this application and it gave me this form, right? When you look at this, this is a user login/registration page, right? So you can see I provide two external services, Facebook and Google, and you can sign up as a new user, right? And you can sign in here. So I'm going to start with a bad user. I'm going to try to sign in. It says authentication failed, try again. So it's deployed in OpenShift right now, this application. But I can So now it's signed in as this colleague of mine whose name is Bruno, and we have allocated like admin and developer as roles, right? And then he can perform some of the tasks on this application. This is like a to-do application, and this uses like HTML5 and REST, JAX-RS, CDI, and it's deployed in the cloud. And I just wanted to show like some of the things that you might see. So do you want to see how Facebook works? Right? So I'm going to log in with Facebook. So it opened this page and you can see it's saying log into a Facebook account with, this is the application I registered with Facebook. So it gave me a client ID and secret. So this app I've registered with Facebook. So Facebook knows who it is, right? So I'm going to log in with my test account I have. So hold on, let me bring it here and try to. So as you can see, it's asking a question to you. So I've logged into Facebook here, that's my test account, right? And it's saying you're logging into Aerogate to do OpenShift app as myself, right, Anil? This app will receive your basic information and your email address, right? So it's requesting 2 pieces of information. So I'm going to do go to app. What happens? Boom. It took some time, but it pulled in my name, right, from Facebook. Now I didn't provide my password to this application. So now this app went from Facebook and got my information. And in this case, it only asked for my name and email address. Very good app. Didn't ask for my birth date or any kind of thing. Okay, so I'm going to log out. Come on. So as you can see, cloud-based applications can be slow based on your Wi-Fi connection. Okay, let's try Google. So in this case, we are using OpenID interaction. In the case of Facebook, we were using OAuth interaction. So in this case, we don't have to register with Google. So it's going to use the URL as the redirect and shows like, to do this app is asking for some information from your Google account, right? And that's my Gmail address if you want to know. So I'm going to say, don't remember this approval, but ask me every time. And then I'm going to allow Google to actually send my name and email address back to Jesus. Okay, it worked a few minutes back. Anyway, okay, I'm not going to, but assume that it works. We have a bug, in our thing. So a registration might be like, all of this fun stuff. Okay, let me show you the OAuth example. So this is the API you wanted to see. The client API, like registration client. Let me close this so that. So when you're registering, you have to give out a registration location, endpoint. Like in this case, I'm registering with a local OAuth server. So you need to give your app name, app URL, app description, and then what you get back from this registration is a client ID and client secret, and you can store it locally. And then you need to get an authorization code from the OAuth server, and assuming the user says, yes, I allow this application to have access to my Facebook account, then you get authorization code. And once you get the authorization code, you need to have the access token on behalf of the user. And this is how the things work, basically. Just say OAuth workflow. I told you about SAML based SSO. So now, assuming like I've few applications running in the cloud, right? I have two web applications running in OpenShift, and the tenant here is Anil Saldana. That's my space in OpenSpace, right? It's my space to deploy my applications. So I've deployed an identity provider for myself, and I'm going to click an application called Salesforce. It's going to redirect to my identity provider. I'm going to just log in. Boom. It's logged into my application. So the identity provider can be a single source for your identity. So I'm going to just use it here. Sorry. And boom, I'm going to go to the second application called employee, and boom, I should be logged in. Because I use my identity provider and I've got SSO. And now I'm going to just log myself out. It's called global logout, and it's going to log me out. And now if I go here and do, it has logged me out actually. Okay. So I'm going to show OpenShift, and this is my OpenShift environment. I'm going to because that app threw that error, right? So I want to restart it so it behaves properly. So I'm going to give my password. It goes to the directory, and it is hopefully authenticated. Shouldn't take this long. Wi-Fi. Okay, when it's doing, any questions? Last minute. I didn't go through like crypto algorithms. I left it out. Not to kind of burden you. Go ahead. No, actually, no cookie. In this case, what happens is the identity provider authenticates user and sends a SAML assertion, and you create a local session for the user. Logout. The logouts handled by the IDP. It sends to like 10 logouts. If you have 10 applications, it's in the background. It sends logout, like a two-phase commit kind of a scenario goes. No, front channel, front, yeah. You don't see it. It's so fast. Unless your Wi-Fi is so slow. Yeah, in this case, it restarted. Yeah, if your Wi-Fi is slow, you can see the things happening. Yeah. But yeah, I have examples wherein I had my local laptop, local applications, IDP in Amazon Web Services. Boom, it does. It can be anywhere. As long as you get that setup right, you can do global logout between multiple domains, and it's fun. It's a bit painful to set up. Other questions? I don't know if they ask for feedback. Do provide feedback. Maybe next year I'll add crypto. Just kidding. Yeah, but the takeaway from this is just don't get overwhelmed by security. Just take a step back, figure out what your requirements are. Don't go by buzzwords. Figure out what your requirements are. Look at the levels of assurance. What type of app, what type of liabilities you have. You have to make a conscious decision after that. So security doesn't have to be scary or complicated. It's just it gets a bad rap, basically people just say security. I have trouble convincing our own people in our community to do security. So it's a tough field basically. But hopefully with this presentation, you should have had some guidelines into what you should be looking for in your enterprises, in your hosting environment, in your cloud environments. And do look for my blog. Come on. 1 second. I have some resources to show. So the app is HTML5, CDI, JAX-RS endpoints. It's deployed on OpenShift. It does all this fun stuff. Relevant standards. 351. It's currently happening. It's mainly for attributes. This is a technical committee I lead at Oasis for identity management. There's a use case document you can use. This is a brand new TC. It's going to happen soon for authorization in the cloud. Some resources. Please do go take a look at my blog for resources, and you can Google my name for many other presentations on SlideShare and stuff. Hopefully, this should be available through Java One site, and also I might probably put it on SlideShare. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to present to you. I know it was the first presentation of the day, and you still showed up. It's probably, yeah. I'm kind of surprised how many people actually show up to a security presentation, which means it's important to people. Thank you.